All right, so Drew, thank you for joining me today. I know you're a comic guy. You have your own comic book YouTube channel like me. I know you're into all that stuff, but I really want to know, just in speaking to you a little bit, we've had little conversations kind of back and forth. What else are you interested in? I know there's a bunch of pop culture things me and you have talked about. What catches your eye, maybe that you grew up with or that you just kind of love and always have loved?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I've never had a shortage of wants. My mom would say, even when I was a little kid, as soon as I got one thing, I was already wanting the next or looking on to the next thing. So, it started at probably, I'd have to say, Silverhawks, Real Ghostbusters, in the toy aisle. Then, not long after that, it was Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. So, basically, I was, just fulfilling my role as a member of my generation that just had pop culture spoon fed to us every day after school, every Saturday morning, every time we opened the cereal box. We were just inundated with all of these IPs that we grew up loving, and whether or not that was our own choice or just what we were conditioned to do. 35 years, 30 years later, however long it's actually been from any given point, I still love this stuff. I just still chasing that feeling of how fun it was, how great it felt back in the day. And luckily, I haven't had to do a whole lot of rebuilding. I got the call, my mom's like, come get your crap out of my basement, which is such a better call than a lot of people get, or a
Yeah.
conversation that a lot of people have to have where they're like, hey, where's my stuff? They're like, oh, that junk, I sold that at a garage sale, or I gave it away, or I threw it in the trash. So I'd much rather be on my side of the fence. But for the most part, today, really what I'm chasing after is I've continued to build out my loose TMNT figure collection. I'm randomly chasing some McDonald's Happy Meal toys here and there, just things that I've wanted to pick up over the years. Dabbling in VHS, kind of got back into Goosebumps. So, um, just any number of things. I really like Universal Monsters and scary things. So anything that is 80s, 90s monster or Halloween type items, I love that. I mean, just to drive that point home, randomly sitting here, I have a carded Real Ghostbusters monster mummy. So, um, not for any particular reason. I just moved something into where it was, and I haven't found a new home for it yet. So I literally
So
just have this stuff everywhere.
safe to say most of the stuff that you were after was in the 90s, am I right? Or because I know when you have spoken, you do have some 80s stuff, but I kind of feel like a lot of stuff you mentioned was late 80s, early 90s. Am I right?
Yeah, I was born in the early 80s. But we kind of, like I said, we got an early start. My dad was the TV guy, so I was the son of the TV guy. So I, from a young age, was teaching people how to use the giant satellite dishes. If you remember those from back in the day, that's what my
Yeah,
dad
of
did.
course.
And kind of the way he broke the ice with people who were nervous about learning how to run it was he'd have me show them how to run this thing at 5 years old. So it's the classic, it's so easy a kid can do it situation.
Yeah.
But I knew where to find all the good cartoons and stuff like that. But I also grew up in the Midwest, pretty much dead center of the country. And, that pop culture delay is real. So a lot of times, by the time I was learning about something, it was already on its way out. We had a lot of, we're Walmart country, so we had a fair amount of access to newer stuff, but then also at the same time, there were a lot of older department stores and discount stores around. So I was buying my Food Fighters probably in the early 90s after they were already gone. Same thing with Barnyard Commandos. I remember there was, well, the store still exists, but it's a True Value hardware store in my hometown, had like 8 or 12 feet of toys. So I know I bought some Gen 1 Transformers there,
Oh,
Dino Riders. So while I got into a lot of these 80s properties when I was super young, they may have actually already been phased out by the time I found them, but it was just, it took them that long to work through the process to where I could find them at my local Five and Dime or wherever. And we also had
that's
the
it.
next town over had a Ben Franklin, which was good for kind of late run or
See
afterthought
that
and stuff too.
we didn't have a Ben Franklin. I know True Value still exists. We actually use it
Yeah.
in my actual real profession. So I
Hmm.
know I'm very familiar with True Value, but like you brought it up. I remember going to like some of these department stores. Like I remember Sears had some Masters of the Universe, JC Penney. There
Yep.
was an old department store by me called Alexander's, which is no longer in
Hmm.
existence. And then we had stores like Bradley's,
Yep.
Caldor. I'm not sure if they existed by you. Did they?
No, we had let's see, we had a venture kind of, that one was a bit of a haul. A couple towns over had a place called Places, which, you know, it was just, I mean, it's like you pulled it right out of the 70s. It's in an old L-shaped strip mall. It was kind of the anchor of that strip mall. The best pizza place in, you know, 45-minute drive was right down from it. Had Mortal Kombat. You go across the road and there's a big park with one of those rocket slides, you know, that it didn't
Yeah.
matter what time of the day you were on it, the slide was a million degrees. So it was just, you know, it was central casting for a Gen X upbringing, even though I was getting in on it as, you know, the elder millennial or the zennial that I
Well,
am.
you brought it up because you said you started to find these things as as they were going out of like I would call
Hmm.
fad. But
Right.
with that said, that says something about the toys themselves, or the line of whatever you were collecting at that time, how much of an influence they had. Because if a toy is dying, even it was on, you know, I was lucky enough. I was born late 70s, but
Hmm.
I had my first experience with these kind of toys with Star Wars. I recently did a video about 80s toys, even though that first series of Star Wars was late 70s. But
Right.
those early 80s toys that I grew up with, I'm sure they trickled down to you probably a few years later as they were kind of moving out of my area towards yours, which I never knew that that was the case, that it would just go like across the country. I always thought like they started in California, worked their way east.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of that. There's a great joke in How I Met Your Mother, the whole Robin Sparkles thing. You know, that mall fashion or hype didn't hit Canada until what, like 1993 or whatever. That's kind of how it felt growing up in the middle of Missouri. You know, you're always 2 to 3 years behind at best. Um, but it was also interesting because my babysitter's son was a year ahead of me. My they lived right, or we lived right across the street from them. One of my best friends in the world grew up at the bottom of the hill on that same block. He was the youngest of four brothers. So my first introduction to Star Wars was him telling me about it because I didn't have a clue. My parents weren't
Yeah.
sci-fi people. Well, my mom likes bad B sci-fi movies from the 50s and 60s, but Star Wars wasn't her jam. So the way I learned about Star Wars was going down to my buddy's house and he'd be watching it. They had, I swear to God, every toy from the entire line because each one of his brothers were pretty much perfectly spaced to line up with either A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, or Jedi. And then we were born in 83, 84. So by the time, you know, we stopped soiling ourselves and kind of became cognizant of what's going on, Droids was over, Ewoks was over, and it was all
Yeah.
just hand me down at that point in time.
Did you guys have a Toys R Us near you?
No, we actually didn't get a Toys R Us until and where I grew up is about an hour and a half from where I'm at now, which is Columbia, Missouri. And Columbia got a Toys R Us sometime in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s. Um,
Wow.
but we had a KB in the mall.
That was my
Um,
next question is did you
yeah,
have a KB? Because that was the
yeah.
next one that I went to. There was a third one by me that I don't remember the name of because there's only one that I knew of, but KB I felt like was
Mhm.
everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean that is my happy place. It had red carpet. I could walk. I can close my eyes and I can visualize this restaurant or this store. You know, I can like walk you right to the aisle where the Ninja Turtles were, and tell you where the electronic cars and all the crap I didn't care about were. But that middle aisle is where all the happiness in the world lived. Just I
I
can't
know
even tell
exactly
you how
what you're
many toys
talking
I bought
about.
out of it.
I
Yeah.
know, and I think everybody out there listening is gonna know. If you went to a KB, you knew exactly. It was like all the way to the left was like remote control cars. Then when there was like a mixed aisle, and then that one right
Hmm.
there was where all the great
Yep.
action figures were. And on the right, they had some odd stuff, and that was the
Right.
last aisle. But the other thing I remember about KB Toys was like obviously you had that aisle we're talking about with all the great action figures, but when you
Hmm.
walked into the store at the register, even behind the register, were all the video games.
Video
And
games
that's the
everywhere.
wildest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just, maybe it's because we were so short back then, but it just seemed like
Yeah.
a huge wall of video games. And it's just like, it was literally mecca for a young kid back in the day. It was just the sense of wonder, it just, I maybe got to go 2-3 times a year at most. So I tried to make the most of it every time I was there.
Yeah, I'm probably about the same as you. Like, I had to beg my dad to go to Toys R Us or KB, but I remember going in when, and this is obviously, you said, like you
Mhm.
said, you got some of this stuff later on, but when the Horde came out for Masters
Mhm.
Universe,
The ultimate threat to the universe is here.
I am Hordak, and this is my evil horde.
Leech! Mantenna! Twizzler!
Your evil even scares me, Hordak, my friend. The evil horde has no friends.
The Evil Horde, new from the Masters of the Universe collection. All figures each sold separately.
Let me out of here.
From Mattel.
Right.
I remember seeing the commercials. I'm like, Dad, we gotta go now because they just hit the shelves. I remember calling, and we had like 3 or 4 KBs in my vicinity, so like within 20 minutes from where I was living at the time. And
So
I would
lucky.
call and be like, do you have the new Horde figures? No. Finally got one that had it. I had to wait for my dad to come home because he worked like
Mhm.
long hours. So
Right.
finally took me over there, and like I didn't see him on the shelves, and I had to ask someone, and they finally brought him out. I'm like, holy shit. It's like one of the best experiences I've ever had, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Horde is actually the He-Man stuff I remember having as a kid, because I didn't have a ton. I mean, I know I had like a Man at Arms, I had a Stratos, had a Prince Adam, the peg warmers, right? For the most part, of the older stuff were the ones that I had. But I know I had a Grizzlor, I had a Leech. Those were kind of my 2 favorite Motu figures I had, and I had a Spydor. I remember that.
Oh wow.
But that was, I'm pretty sure those are figures I bought at the hardware store. It wasn't first run. It would have probably been 86, 87 at the earliest, before I got those. So I feel like they would have been discount store grabs for the most part. But
Yeah,
that was the interesting.
87 was, I was
Oh,
gonna
go
say
ahead.
87 was the last year of the line. So
Yeah, and I mean, I picked up a lot of those figures since, but I feel like, yeah, it was the last year for the line, but we are all pretty much moved on. But I also was right in that weird time where regular Motu was wrapping up and New Adventures was launching.
yeah.
So, I knew guys who had Gray Skull, but then we had the New Adventures Power Sword. And I mean, it felt like everybody had that. So it was just this really weird mishmash. And then at the same time, Silverhawks came in there. And I actually still remember playing with Thunder Sharks as a kid. I wish I would have kept those things. But so that's something that's on my short list to try and track down, are those bank busters, because holy crap, are they expensive.
Did you still have all your stuff when you were a kid? You said your mom didn't throw anything out, but you still have all that stuff?
I sold some of it like at garage sales over the years and stuff. I remember I had the entire line of Kenner Aliens when they first came out, loved those. And then eventually I got to a point where it's like, hey, I'm 10 years old. This is freaking me out. So I sold most of it. So those I know I sold. I've got, there's some things I can't find, but for the most part, I would say I have at least 80%, maybe 85% of everything I ever had as a kid. Whether
That's pretty good. No,
I'm
that's
just-
good, because I was like you. Like I remember before I moved to where I am now, not the
Mhm.
house, but the area I am now,
Right.
we had a big garage sale and I sold all my Masters Universe figures. It was like the worst thing to do because I almost had all of them. Sold Castle Grayskull,
Yeah.
Snake Mountain. I had the Thundercats. I had Voltron, all gone in one shot.
Ugh.
And they sold them for like, $1,
Nothing.
$2. What the hell did I
Yeah.
know as a kid,
Yeah,
But,
I mean, and that's why we all spend so much time and effort chasing them now, is because so many people have that experience. Just looking over here, I've bought a monster face in box, King County last fall. I know that's something I had that I separated with at some point, but above that, I've got all my monster in my pocket, which somehow I managed to keep. So, and I still go home and dig through, and I've got some of my stuff out. I haven't even recovered all of it yet. So I still don't know what I might find in some random box. But for the most part, all my Ghostbusters, the majority of my Ninja Turtles, all of my Thundercat, well, most of my Thundercats, all survived. And same thing with my Motu, but I didn't really have much there to worry about.
So you mentioned a few toy lines that you grew up with, like Power Rangers, TMNT, Ghostbusters. You have an absolute favorite that you were like no matter what, that was like your thing to go to?
It changed over the course of the years because it started out like Ghostbusters was Die Hard, and then as the Turtles came on the scene, that was my thing, and so I just kind of transitioned from Ghostbusters for probably 3 or 4 years into Ninja Turtles for 3 or 4 years, and then as I started getting a little older, perfect time is when they dropped Power Rangers. So I think I was in fourth grade. I had just started fourth grade when Power Rangers came out. So I've still got all my Zords and stuff like that too. So, but that was kind of the three main phases, I would say, and with lots of little side missions and distractions.
I'm gonna get killed here. I know I'm gonna get
Okay.
killed from about to say, but I grew up like I was already, I think, in eighth grade or in early high school when Power Rangers, I think, was hitting
Mhm.
TV and everybody was going crazy. Is it me, or was that like such a weird show to watch? Because it wasn't like anything from the 80s that I grew up with, because
Mhm.
they're live action, I guess maybe it was, where I was so used to cartoons that it was just like it was just incredibly weird. Is it me, or
It
was it?
it was interesting because it kind of helped bridge the gap for me, at least in my experience, between like the actual cartoons, but then at that time, Saved by the Bell reruns were already everywhere. So you were starting to get into some of those more like teen or older child directed shows. So it kind of helped blend between the teenage drama aspect of it, the live action stuff, well, like the acted stuff, and then the repurposed stuff from Japan, which was all the fight scenes and stuff like that. That kind of kept some of the cartoony element, so it kind of helped balance those two worlds. Is kind of the way I looked at it. But I'd still go home and watch Batman the animated series or Darkwing Duck or Animaniacs or whatever after school. So it's not like I was a purist one way or the other.
Yeah, to me, even in high school, Batman animated series, like I'd get home and that's the first thing I would turn on once I got home from high school.
Yeah.
That was such a great show. But also, not so much Darkwing Duck, but the original DuckTales.
Yeah.
One of the most greatest cartoons. Forget just TV shows. If you
Oh, it's
consistently
fantastic.
watch that show, amazing stories they told through
Yep.
cartoons, which I always thought was great. But
Yeah, DuckTales was great. Tailspin was great. I mean, Disney was just on fire at that point. I didn't care much for the gummy bears, but it's okay. They didn't all have to speak to me.
now that you're an adult,
Mhm.
what is like
Allegedly.
you mentioned like the McDonald's toys, yeah. You mentioned like the McDonald's toys. That has to be a
Uh-huh.
bitch to try to collect. But what else? If it was like the first thing when you got back into you said to yourself, like, now that I'm older, oh, I saw that, I gotta have that. What was the first thing you
Mhm.
kind of went back to and was like, oh, I need to grab this again?
The first thing I did is I bought a complete set, and this is probably blasphemous, but I bought a complete sealed set of the 1991 McNugget Buddies, the Halloween
Oh,
McNugget Buddies. And I
wow.
proceeded to open them, and they became my Halloween decorations. But they all go
Well, that's a
back
good
in the
idea.
bags every year and all that. Then once I had that, I'm like, having the store display would be really awesome. So then I bought that, and you can't see it very well, but that's actually what is just past that spinner rack right there. That is the store display for the
Where do
McNugget.
you even find that?
eBay, where one finds all things.
Yeah. I was gonna
But
say there's no way like outside of eBay. I mean, maybe in like a garage sale find or something, that would be wild, but I don't know.
a buddy of mine had a friend who set up with him at Kane County last fall, which Kane County is the big Chicago toy show. Happens 3 times a year. And he had one. I'm like, dude, I didn't know you had that. And he's like, well, I didn't know you wanted it. So I missed out on that one. But I found one shortly thereafter. But some of these toy shows, you'd be amazed at the stuff that's still floating around out there that you can pick up.
See, I go to they have a couple toy shows by me, and there's actually going to be one at the end of July, like literally down the road from me, which is the first time I'm seeing that there's a show this close. But the
Mm-hmm.
other ones by me, like I keep seeing the same stuff over and over. Like they'll have old loose Motu with none of the gear, none of the
Right.
accessories. I don't even see TMNT original stuff like loose. I'll see the LJN WDF figures once in a
Mm-hmm.
while, all completely
The dog
destroyed, but
toys.
everything.
Yep.
Yeah, everything's new that I'm seeing now. Everything's new. All the newer toys that are coming out, they have that, but nothing vintage, which sucks.
Yeah, you see a lot of that, and we're pretty fortunate. There's a really long running toy show in St. Louis called Toy Man. Um, the guy who runs it crams so many vendors in there just by the law of averages. You're going to find some older stuff, but yeah, it's like every year a little bit more of the classifieds and legends and all that stuff kind of creeps in and just chokes out the vintage stuff. But I'm also at the point where I'm so tired of seeing just basic Star Wars
Yeah.
vintage figures, basic GI Joes. It's just like you always see the same stuff. Um, and I realized that the reason you see that stuff all the time is because that's the common stuff, and it's harder to find the harder to find stuff. That's why they call it harder to find stuff.
Yeah.
But the thing I like about Kane County is that it's so massive, and everybody just they'll save up and bring out their amazing stuff, and you can go absolutely hog wild up there. And I have.
Have you ever found something that's like incredibly rare or like the crown jewel of your toy collection?
Um, trying to think. Trying to think what I'd even consider a crown jewel. I know, like last fall in Chicago, I came home with a Chef Boyardee Super Shredder. So it's the mail away Super Shredder figure, which is one of the, I don't know, it's probably in the top 5%, 10% of Ninja Turtles figures. That was really cool. Or maybe that was last spring. Last fall, I picked up the monster face, like I mentioned. That was just something that, I don't know, I think it was like a $300 thing because it's mint in box, but it's just a great display piece. Trying to think actual grail level stuff because I feel like I'm still working towards a lot of that. I know I was in St. Louis this last time. I'm working on the second wave of the TMNT Universal Monsters figures. So I was pretty thrilled to find a Leo as the creature from the Black Lagoon. That's one of the tougher ones of the Universal line. So that last series is just outside of Bride of Frankenstein. They're pretty pricey, a little tough. But
Is that the NECA series? 'Cause I always see the NECA ones of the TMNT. Is that
NECA
it?
is kind of riffing off of that. Playmates in 93, 94, I believe, is when they did the original wave of Universal Monsters, TMNT. So the first wave was Don is Dracula, Leo is werewolf, Mike is Frankenstein, and Raph is the mummy. Got that one knocked out, thank God. Then the second wave, they came back, and it's April as the Bride of Frankenstein, Leo is the creature from the Black Lagoon, Mike as the Invisible Man. That's one of the money ones. I think he's the most expensive of all of them. And then the last one is Raph as the Metaluna mutant from the movie This Island Earth.
Now, it's just these are all loose, I assume, right?
Yeah, I'm a loose collector. I actually wound up trading a carded, hard to find carded turtle for my Super Shredder. My Chef
It's
Boyardee
definitely
Super Shredder.
a lot more financially, what's the word I want to look for? Responsible to collect loose. I
Yeah,
will say that because the
yeah.
carded shit gets out of control.
Yeah, I do have a few carded things, but for the most part, I don't want a complete carded turtle set. I mean, it's going to be painful enough to try and do a complete loose turtle set.
Yeah.
But I got a really good deal on Heritage recently, so I wound up picking up 4 tin backs, TMNT tin backs, and they're all the Softhead Macau releases. So I got Splinter and then 3 of the 4 turtles that have the fan club inserts. So I got Raph, Raph, Leo, and Mikey that are all fan clubs. And whoever put this lot in that auction probably got a talking to. I think it was supposed to go in a different auction. It was literally the last lot on Sunday night, which is when they run all their Golden Age books, right, on their weekly comic sale.
Yeah.
It was the last lot. I got it for a song. I couldn't buy 2 of them at retail for what I paid for the whole lot. So, it's better be lucky than good sometimes.
I got to start paying attention to heritage toy sales then. Jeez. Because
I
I
mean,
have started to try to put some stuff together like G1 Transformers, which can be
mhm,
ridiculously expensive. Like for
yes.
people who collect Transformers, the G1 line, especially the first 18 that came out, are just insane. Forget boxed or even, sealed, which is almost impossible
Mhm.
to find. The loose figures alone are a fortune.
Right. I've got an Optimus, I've got a Starscream. I'd love to have a Megatron. I actually just closed a deal. I'm gonna go pick up a toy collection. I think was today Tuesday on Thursday, and all I can see is it's a box and then some other spread out of G1 Transformers in there. I don't even know exactly what all's in there yet, so I'm really looking forward to diving through that. But you're right, those early Transformers are just awful, especially like I'd love to have a box Megatron. I'd love to have a loose
Yeah.
Megatron. But when you got guys that are talking, you get down and they're inspecting the quality of the styrofoam that's in the box.
Yeah.
It's like I'm going to go focus on something else. You guys are a bit much.
But this is a good segue because you mentioned that you're going to be picking up a toy collection.
Mhm.
I know obviously you have a comic YouTube channel, but I know
Yep.
also that you deal at shows and stuff. Do you deal
Mhm.
toys as well?
I'm just dabbling in it. I've been picking up toy collections here and there over the last 3 or 4 years. Um, that's actually how I got a lot of my Motu stuff back, as I bought a huge collection. It's almost every figure from waves 1 through 5 and a couple of 6, including an Eternia. Just awesome stuff. Um, but I kind of wanted to hit critical mass almost a little bit. I didn't want to go out with just a few things, and so I've been filling up those giant 27-gallon totes or whatever they are you can buy at the warehouse stores. And I've got a stack of those staring me in the face. But I finally started going through for my last comic show that I put on here in town. I sold through a bunch of my dollar books, so a lot of space that would normally be taken up with cheaper comics. I found some nice tabletop display cases. I went through and I got a bunch of stuff ready to put in those. So for the first time, I did actually sell toys.
And let me ask you, what is the difference? And I've always wanted to know this because I've set up at a few shows to sell some comics, but
Mhm.
what is the difference between selling toys and selling comics? Is there a big deal if you're set up at a show, or is the collector basically the same?
It kind of feels the same. I feel like toys, you have a lot bigger opportunity to miss, because with comics, you can just fit so much more variety in that same square footage. You can fit 300 books in a long box or 250 books in a long box. I bet I don't have 100 toys in one of my tabletop display cases, especially
Yeah.
when I went through and I tried to make sure I picked up a lot of and completed a lot of the TMNT figures. I put them in nice plastic bubbles. They look really great, but you lose the some of the volume you can fit into the booth when you up the presentation like that. So it's similar, but they each have their nuances. I'd say would be the main difference.
So you mentioned the blisters. So what do you
Mhm.
use? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who use different things to kind of display whether they're selling at a show or
Mhm.
they're, at home on their shelf. So what do you use?
Well, I don't have one here with me, but I believe they're just little clamshell bubbles from, I think I got them at Collector's Warehouse. They sell a variety of different sizes of them. And I try and use those for some of my better figures, especially if I've got like complete figures that I kind of want to display more. Now, what I do have, if you just got a random figure, that this one actually has a couple accessories, but if it's just a random figure and it's incomplete, I'll just throw it in a Ziploc bag, and then you can dive into the bins, which are, I think, what most people are probably accustomed to experiencing at a toy show.
How about the market for toys as per comics? Is there a big difference? Obviously, I'm very familiar with the comic side of the
Yeah.
market, but the toy side of the market, although I'm, a small collector of toys, I'm not into you go into some people's rooms, they have forget it. It's just like shit everywhere. There's every little
Yeah.
figure they grew up with on a shelf. But the market for toys, is it would you say stronger than comics right now? Or, is the collector, we kind of covered that already, how the collector's mindset was, but how's the market for toys right now?
In my limited view, just kind of in the things I have been chasing and following, it almost feels like it's weaker than comics are right now. Had a similar trajectory going into COVID. Everybody just had so much money and they dumped it into collectibles. So things got insane on that side of the world, just like they did over with comics. But I feel like the toy side has come down quite a bit harder, or at least maybe quicker. Maybe the better way to look at it is that toy dealers are less likely to sit on something that they know they're going to lose money on. They'd rather just get the money that they can back out of it and invest that into other things. And honestly, that kind of seems to be just a general trend I see in toys versus comics, where a lot of times dealers don't really care if something moves or not. They've got their price and that's what they're going to sell it at. I feel like a lot of the toy sellers I see are a lot more motivated to move products so they can cycle in more stuff, because as much as some of us comic guys may look like hoarders, I think some of the toy guys put us to shame.
Yeah, I agree with you. The one thing I've noticed, and it's come to my mind, is that the stuff that we grew up with in the 80s, and I'll say early to mid 90s, is that as our kids grow up, like I feel like while some of the toy lines have kind of maintained, like Transformers, you get new iterations of Transformers a couple times a year, but I feel like when we're 70 years old, all those lines will be forgotten. Do you think that's part of the reason why toys have dropped right now, especially those vintage toys that are like, kind of harder to move because there's less interest in them now?
I don't know. I mean, I look at certain IPs. I mean, like you said, Transformers, Ninja Turtles is kind of in the same way. At this point, you're looking at what, 4 or 5 generations of people who have grown up with one iteration of Turtles or Transformers or what have you at this point. And I think that's going to help some of those brands stay relevant. Because TMNT's 40 years old now, and there's maybe been a 3-year window where there wasn't some sort of culturally relevant turtle action out there.
Yeah.
Transformers, I mean, I feel like Transformers is as strong or stronger than it was even when we were kids, almost. Like,
those
am I
are
wrong
two
on
bad
that?
examples. No, you're right, because those are the two that have kind of like withstood everything that's going on. But
Right.
like Thundercats, Voltron,
Mhm.
Ghostbusters, Masters of the Universe, even though Madballs even had to come back,
Yeah.
not too long ago. Like it seems like everything that was old came back, but then didn't do as well once they came back. So that's my mind. Like I think you're right. Transformers,
Mhm.
even G.I. Joe, household names, been around
Right.
since the first iteration. But like
Mhm.
after those specific lines, I feel like everything else, like it's gonna go by the wayside. Like stuff that they reissue to take those Thundercats, there's the new Thundercats toys. Like who's buying them? Or kids are not buying them, right? The adult
Yeah.
collectors are buying them.
I think that's right. And I think one of the big problems they have is just accessibility. I'll just grab this
That's a good point.
um, Ghostbusters figure. It doesn't have a price on it, but I know I've picked up some Turtles figures and stuff recently, or looked at them. The retail price was $3.97 for these things
Yeah.
back then. You look at some of the Star Wars figures, they were $1.77. Who can go and amass a collection of toys like we had when we were kids, when the most basic crappy action figure you can get right now is 10 to 12 bucks?
Yeah.
If you look at the 6-inch
Point.
figures, they're 20 to 25. So I feel like
Yeah.
the toy market is doing the same thing that the comic market has done. They're trying everything they can to get money out of the fans that they've managed to retain to this point, as opposed to putting money and effort into growing new fans for the future.
I think you hit it right on the head right there. Case in point, like Masters Universe Origins, the newer line that came out in 2020, they started out at $9.99 per figure.
Yeah.
Now they're like $21.95 per figure, which is ridiculous. And they
Crazy.
did that like halfway through. They started putting out deluxe figures, which to me,
Mhm.
I have a problem with deluxe figures in general because they come with a lot of hocus pocus that I don't think is necessary. I'd rather have just a
Right.
figure with a few cool accessories on card
Mhm.
and pay the cheaper price. Is that the same thing? You would say the same thing?
Yeah, but that Mosquito was pretty sweet with all like the clip-on blood effects and all that stuff. I mean, that one was pretty cool. But yeah, for the most part, it's just gimmicky. Like we didn't need a deluxe version of, was it Leech?
Yeah.
Come on, like come on. No, yeah, no,
Ra-
we don't need that.
Ram Man was a deluxe figure.
Yeah,
I mean, back in the day, he just came with an axe. That's it. Like
yeah,
I don't need
you
the
can't
whole.
make up for how crappy that figure was 40 years ago by making
Yeah.
a deluxe version of him now. You're just that ship has sailed.
If you'd like to become a sponsor here on the Mighty Rewind podcast, make sure you reach out at the Mighty Rewind podcast at gmail.com.